When you think of Singapore, you probably think of success, right? A super efficient, gleaming city that just works. But what if that incredible success story has actually created two completely different Singapores? Today, we're going to peel back the layers on the real price of winning.
It all kind of starts with this one wild story from an elite primary school. A student remembers her classmates being totally stunned to learn from a textbook that most people in Singapore live in public housing. And, they weren't being mean or anything. They were just so insulated in their own world that they had literally no idea how the average person lives.
And look, this isn't just some classroom story. The numbers tell the exact same tale. The top 5% of households in Singapore hold a full third of all the nation's wealth. And get this, according to the government's own report, that number is probably an underestimate.
So, this brings us right to the heart of our explainer today, this idea of two Singapores. A place where the elite and the average citizen live on the same tiny island, but in completely different universes that pretty much never, ever overlap.
Now, the official story, the one we all know, is about pragmatic self-reliance. It's a really powerful narrative, right? The government helps people help themselves. It's the story that built the nation. But the question is it the whole story?
Let's really dig in here and ask, is self-reliance a genuine philosophy that guides the country, or has it become something more like a branding exercise? To figure that out, we're going to look at three of Singapore's absolute core national programs.
Okay, first up, the Central Provident Fund, or CPF. We tend to think of it as a state pension, but it's not. In reality, it's a forced savings account. What that means is all the risk of living too long, of a market crash, it all falls on you, the individual. If you don't earn enough to save enough, well, the system doesn't have a safety net for that.
Next up is HDB, Singapore's famous public housing. The myth is that it's social housing for the people. The reality? It operates much more like a subsidized property market, and it's specifically designed for those assets to go up in value. Now, this was amazing for the first few generations who bought their flats for cheap, but it makes housing harder and harder to afford for each new generation.
And finally, we have workfare. It has welfare right there in the name, but it's really a wage supplement that's tied to you having a job. So the second you lose your job, which, let's be honest, is when you need help the most, that financial support just vanishes.
So you gotta ask, why does this ideology stick around? Well, the source material argues it's because the governing class has become so disconnected from what life is like for the median person that they can't even see the gap anymore. I mean, think about ministerial salaries being tied to the top 1,000 earners. Or the whole Ride Out Road affair, where a big controversy was basically cleared by an internal investigation. It's not necessarily about corruption, it's about the problem of a system investigating itself and, surprise, surprise, finding that everything's just fine.
To really wrap your head around the choices Singapore has made, it really helps to look at a completely different way of doing things. So, for a minute, let's bring in another model for comparison. Let's talk about Denmark. And wow, when you put them side by side, the difference isn't just about money. It's a fundamental gap in philosophy. Denmark's whole system is built on trusting its citizens and protecting them from the failures of the market. Singapore's is built on the idea that every citizen has to face that failure all on their own.
The Danish system has this cool name, Flexicurity. It's a pretty clever mix of a flexible job market, so companies can hire and fire easily, with a really secure social safety net. If you lose your job, the state is right there to catch you, covering up to 90% of your salary while they help you retrain for something new. The state basically absorbs the risk for everyone, so people aren't terrified of change.
And this, right here, is where the story takes a really fascinating turn. Because an ideology like this, when it's in place for decades, doesn't just create policies, it creates a certain type of person. The system of self-reliance hasn't just shaped the economy, it has profoundly shaped the mindset of Singaporeans themselves. Which leads us to a really provocative question. If Singapore wanted to move towards a more collective, Nordic-style system, who would be the single biggest obstacle standing in the way?
Now, you'd probably think the answer is the government, right? With its whole history of fiscal conservatism and self-reliance. But the argument we're looking at today says, that's not it.
And here's the real twist in this whole story. The biggest obstacle might actually be the Singaporean people themselves. Think about it. After decades of living in a system where your house is your biggest investment and individual success is everything, you've created a population that now actively supports and continues the very ideology that shaped it.
And you can see why there's not much motivation to change things up. After a big report detailed just how bad wealth inequality was getting,
The government, sitting on a $15 billion surplus, gave out a few $100 in handouts. Calls from inside Parliament for an estate tax, or even just for better data, were shot down. It's kind of like diagnosing a really serious disease and then just prescribing a couple of paracetamols.
So, this brings us to the final, and maybe the most uncomfortable part of this whole conversation. It's not just about what the government is willing to do anymore. It's about what the people are willing to give up.
You know, the debate always gets framed as, oh, would you pay higher taxes? But that's the simple version. The real question goes so much deeper. It's about the core values that hold the society together and whether people are actually willing to rethink them.
I mean, let's get real for a second. Would you, as a homeowner, be truly okay if your HDB flat was just a home, a place to live, and not an appreciating asset you're counting on to fund your retirement? For a lot of people, that's not a policy idea. That's a direct threat to their life savings.
Or what about education? Would parents give up on the dream of getting their kid into that one elite school if it meant a system like Finland's, where every single school is designed to be just as good as the next? That drive to give your own kid an advantage is an incredibly powerful force keeping the current sorting system in place.
And this all boils down to the ultimate question. So much of Singapore's social engine is fueled by visible success, by ranking, by upgrading your condo, upgrading your car. Could you truly live in a society that gives all of that up? A society that, like the Danes, kind of just believes nobody is better than anyone else and simply stops keeping score. And that brings us right back to the central quote from our source. The question is not what the government is willing to do, it is what we are willing to give up. The future of Singapore's social contract might not be decided in Parliament, but in how every single person answers that very, very personal question.